All right, here we are, very busy. We're getting details right now about what happened in this 500-page book. This is the budget right here. Let me show you exactly what's in it. We'll get some reaction from the opposition parties right now. Changes to old age security. It raises the age of eligibility from 65 to 67. That starts in the year 2023, or finishes in the year 23. Anybody under the age of 54 will be affected. It includes $5.2 billion in cuts. What does all that mean? It means, one, reducing what Jim Flaherty called the back office, and we'll dig into that, expenditures of the government departments. 19,200 federal jobs will be cut over 3 years. That's less than half of what the Liberals cut in the mid-90s. It still amounts to a 4.8% cut in the public service. Not all at once, I say. Those will be phased out over 3 years. There's lots more in here, and we'll get you more reaction on the budget. There's talks about R&D. There's talks about pensions. Let's get reaction, though, right now. The leader of the official opposition, Thomas Mulcair, is with me now. Tom Mulcair, first of all, it was your first time reacting to a federal budget, and you and Stephen Harper, for the first time, by the way, exchanging questions in QP. What's your overall impression of this?
Well, I was the NDP finance critic for the past 4 budgets as well, so I'm used to their sleight of hand. The Conservatives got elected on a promise to create jobs. What we have in this budget is tens of billions of dollars in cuts to pensions, as you just correctly pointed out. They're also confirming, because there's nothing added here that would allow them to reverse what they had announced before Christmas, unilaterally cutting tens of billions, 31 billion to be exact, in what had been the projected transfer to provinces in healthcare. You know, we decided in Canada 50 years ago that no Canadian family would have to choose between sending their sick child to the doctor and being able to put groceries on the table. This is exactly the type of institution that's at risk with what the Conservatives are pursuing here as a policy. Now,
they will say that, in fact, we've increased the transfers to the provinces up to 2017 on health care. We haven't reduced them all. So they're saying it's increased. And there's an increase overall. They say overall spending is up $12 billion over 3 years in this budget.
They've, of course, decreased what had been agreed to and what was projected. Let's look at what Stephen Harper said last June 7th in the House, word for word. We will not cut pensions, verbatim. We will not cut transfers to the provinces for major programs such as healthcare. That's word for word what he said last June. So we can see that he's not a man of his word. This is what Canadians are facing now. This is the whole pyramid of public administration exists to do one thing, to provide a service. When you're going through this sort of exercise, the very last thing you cut is the service itself. They're cutting food inspection. They're cutting transportation inspection. That's where this leads us. But the biggest mistake right now is that the Conservatives are following a policy that's already leaving future generations with a massive ecological, economic, and social debt that they're never going to be able to absorb. Now we're telling them they're going to have to work 2 years longer. They're already borrowing $35,000 on average to get a bachelor's degree. When are they going to participate in the economy? When will that generation be able to buy a house? That whole generation is going to be the first in Canadian history to receive less. We are the first generation in Canadian history that will leave less than what we receive.
So is this a generational conflict?
It's absolutely a question of intergenerational equity, fairness, because our generation is not assuming its costs now. The way we're developing the oil sands means that we're leaving the cost of cleaning up the air, the soil, and the water to future generations. That's pushing up the Canadian dollar artificially high. That's had the effect of killing the manufacturing sector, mostly in Quebec and in Ontario. Hundreds of thousands of good-paying manufacturing jobs being lost. So we've totally destabilized the balanced Canadian economy. Now they're going to try to make it even easier to push through new projects because they're going to scrap our environmental evaluation system in Canada.
All right, so let's talk about that for a second. They're saying that's helpful for job creation. They'll have this for big resource jobs, including Northern Gateway Pipeline. They'll say there'll be an assessment period of 24 months, period. Okay, that will be the cap on that. What's your conflict with that?
Having been an environment minister for several years, I can tell you that you actually can do a proper assessment in a couple of years if you're putting in the resources. But here's the rub. They're not going to put in the resources, and they're not going to enforce existing legislation. The oil sands are not respecting right now the Navigable Waters Act. They're not respecting the Migratory Birds Act. They're not respecting the Fisheries Act, all the deleterious substances that are going to fish habitat. So those costs should have been included. You know, it's like somebody has a factory making a product and they're pushing all the garbage into the river at the back. They're using the air, the soil, and the water as an unlimited free dumping ground, and that's another debt that we're leaving to future generations. Unlike a country like Norway that put hundreds of billions away for the future generations to live on, we're only leaving them the debt from the mess that we're making now.
Let's just run through a couple of the big things. The cuts will be $5.2 billion by 2015. They say that will return Canada to surplus by that same year. They say That's prudent. Could have gone more. They're only touching the pool of $80 billion, not the big transfers, just that $80 billion in programs, mainly aimed at the public service. They say that's prudent. What's your view, getting back to balance by 2015? It's
almost as if it became a question of arguing for the public service, or meaning the public servants, but it's actually the service to the public that's being cut. That's the problem. And they've created the problem themselves by hollowing out the fiscal capacity of the government. All told, $50 billion a year in tax reductions between what the Liberals cut and what they cut for the corporations. Right now, they're not paying their fair share in Canada. We're way below the OECD, other countries that we're dealing with. So that's the biggest problem. We should have stopped those decreases to the corporations. We would have maintained the fiscal capacity of the government. We wouldn't be cutting services such as inspections for food and for transportation safety.
What about this? Let's talk about old age security. Savings from old age security changes amount to $10 billion. They say by 2030, seniors will no longer be able to apply to the guaranteed income supplement because they're automatically enrolled in it, so they don't have to do that. And by the way, public servants join the federal public service in 2013 will now retire by the age of 65 rather than 60. So those are some key areas you've talked about before. What's your criticism of that?
Well, in a country that's as rich as Canada, it's totally unacceptable that we still have hundreds of thousands of seniors living below the poverty line. They're not addressing that. There is a guaranteed income supplement that exists for the poorest, and that should have been boosted. That overall was about $700 million. It's not something that would have cost a great deal. Again, it's a question of choices and priorities. The Conservatives would prefer to continue massive transfers towards certain sectors that are already very profitable. The areas like manufacturing that needed the help, they're not making profits. The reduction in taxes doesn't give them anything. They're not paying taxes.
Do you agree that public servants should pay more in pensions under this new 50-50 formula?
I think that this is typical of the Conservatives. It's always a race to the bottom. It's a zero-sum game. We should be fighting for all Canadians, not just people in the public service, all Canadians to have access, and this is something that the NDP does propose, to a guaranteed benefit pension that they can buy and that would be transportable from one job to the next. It's not a very complicated thing to put in place.
Well, they're saying you just can't. It's not the same. You can't.
Well, they don't. They're abysmal public administrators. They don't like the government. They like being in power, but they're not very good public administrators. They're not good managers. So they're not going to go at this with a scalpel. They'll always go at it with a rusty machete, and that's the type of thing we're seeing here. A clear cut.
All right, so you don't support the changes to OAS?
It's an abysmal decision.
Out of interest, and I know, and the Liberals have also said it affects the poor seniors, but with the fact that people are living longer, there's a demographic bulge. In other words, we've got an aging population. They always point out 4 workers to support every retiree. Now, we will soon be 2 workers. Why not just push the age to 67?
Every objective analysis that's been done, whether it's by the Parliamentary Budget Officer or by the OECD, has said that our system is absolutely sustainable. It's a classic straw man that the Conservatives have set up so that they can knock it down. It's a sop to their base. It's an incredible error. People have paid. They're due for retirement. And by the way, if they work 2 years more, you're just taking 2 years more to start creating new jobs for young people coming on the market. The same ones who are going to be bearing the brunt of all the debt that we're leaving. Gen Xers should be up in arms over this budget.
All right, so, I mean, do you support, by the way, getting rid of the penny?
I think getting rid of the penny is a good idea, but overall the budget is penny-wise and pound-foolish.
Okay, so there's an agreement on that. Obviously, you're not going to support this budget.
I'd be very surprised. I'm going to have a discussion with my caucus, but I'll be very surprised if I find anyone in the NDP caucus who agrees with this budget. I
got 30 seconds with you. Will you put forward any changes to say, I'll support the budget if? What would those be?
Top of mind would be preserving pensions, especially coming up with more for the guaranteed income supplement to help seniors who live in poverty. That's, in a country this rich, it's unbelievable that we're still allowing that to happen. And I would maintain transfers in healthcare, because otherwise we're heading to a 2-tier system where the rich will have one system for themselves and everybody else will be stuck waiting in line in another system. All
right, Tom Mulcair, the quote you'll remember there is penny wise, pound foolish. His characterization on a budget that eliminates the penny, but Tom Mulcair says it eliminates too many other things along with it. Appreciate that. Leader of the official opposition, Tom Mulcair here.